You make the argument, and I know we've talked about it a lot on this show, and I've been kind of agnostic on it, but there's sort of the case that Bernie makes, and a lot of people make it with a sort of, I think, a certain kind of wonky sincerity of like, hey, if we have Medicare for all, your taxes will go up on the upfront, but there'll be all these other savings, obviously, because you won't be going out of pocket to some, predator intermediary service provider that will, jack up your prices and deny care and all these other things. So, pound for pound, most people are going to save under single payer. But, and granted, I mean, just to be clear, as you run this sort of scenario out, we're already assuming we're in a place politically where we've passed Medicare for all. So obviously we're in a totally different place politically. So people should sort of set aside that specific set of worries and objections. But play out, your scenario actually is that if we pass Medicare for all, it might actually lead us to even deeper bottom end and stimulative and redistributive tax cuts for most people.
Yeah, and Stephanie Kelton has talked about this. And so it's not, I'm not the creator of the idea, but it's kind of
Ryan, would you outline your idea, please, that you came up with?
Yeah.
All right, thank you. This is Ryan Grimm's idea about
exactly. There you go.
Thank you, Ryan. Go ahead.
And she's an economist who has advised Sanders, but she and Sanders don't exactly see eye to eye on everything.
Right. She's at Stony Brook now, I think, right?
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
Right. And she advised his campaign and also worked on the budget committee when he was the chairman there. And so her argument is this, that if you actually succeed in implementing a single-payer health care plan that does what it says it's going to do, which is squeeze a lot of the waste, fraud, and abuse out of the health care plan, and if you assume that health care is something like a third of our GDP, you've now just squeezed a third of our GDP. Mm-hmm. What one person's waste is another person's job.
Right.
So you've now thrown a lot of salespeople and actuaries and pencil pushers and
pharma reps, telemarketers, customer service people.
Right. You're all of these different folks are now some of them would be absorbed by the government, who would need to oversee their own plan. Some of the spending would, instead of being spent on healthcare, people would spend it elsewhere in the economy, and so that would fuel some growth. But about half of the healthcare spending in this country is done by the government already. So if you've squeezed that, now all of a sudden you've taken government spending out of the economy, and that means people are going to lose jobs. Like that's just how it works. And so Kelton's point was that you may, if you succeed enough, you may actually contract the economy. Mm. And in order to get it going again, you then need tax cuts to stimulate the economy, and so you create a lot of economic activity that hopefully is more useful than the stuff that you squeezed out.
And in this scenario, because again, we're in a scenario where President Sanders and some type of deeply reformed Democratic Congress has passed Medicare for all, those tax cuts are going to be designed to, they're going to go to working people, they're going to go to middle income people, they're going to go to invest in green technologies, all of the positive areas where we could filter money, not to corporations and plutocrats. So as part of the scenario you're right. And ironically, and I think Stephanie Kelton's pointing this out herself, I mean, in a very destructive and, top-end redistribution way, Republicans obviously accept some of this logic. Because they've advanced some, totally disingenuously, but they've advanced some of these types of arguments in calling for their tax plans, for sure. They do it all the time.
Oh, yes. Right. They are deep believers in this philosophy. They just don't, they don't, they just pretend they're not when Democrats get in power.
Right.
And it's very smart on their part, because then when Republicans are in power, they can give a bunch of tax cuts. And then when they're out of power, they can say, well, the deficit is so big, Democrats really shouldn't spend. And Democrats are like, oh, you're right. Boy, the deficit is really terrible.
Right.
Shame. We'd love to do all these things we campaigned on, but we just can't.
I have
And then
final.
people are like, well, what do you mean you can't? Why don't we elect somebody else then?
Right, which is maybe finally what we're starting to do. I have a